Okay, so about 3 months ago, I did my annual free agent predictions. I get them wrong every single year. So I thought to myself, let's take a look back since we're at the end of the offseason here and see just how bad they were. Let's get into it. Okay, so first off, I had Clay Holmes signing with the Royals. Now, at the time, we didn't know that he was getting interest as a starter, which is now what he's going to be doing with the Mets. Now, at the time, I thought the Royals needed another back end of the bullpen kind of a guy to go along with Lucas Erceg and Hunter Harvey. Their bullpen was a little inconsistent in the first half last year, so I thought it made a lot of sense to add at least a setup guy in Clay Holmes. However, I think I was on the right track, though, because they ended up signing Carlos Estevez. Let's see who the closer is going to be between Lucas Erceg and him, but I think I was on the right track here. I don't think this was too terrible of a pick. Up next, I had Matthew Boyd signing with the Dodgers. I know, this one was pretty bad, but do I at least get a brownie point for thinking the Dodgers would bring in a left-handed starting pitcher? I'm just saying. I'm kidding, but yeah, I was way off with the left-handed starter. They brought in Blake Snell instead. I think that took a lot of people off guard at the time, but coming into the offseason, I was thinking the Dodgers weren't going to go as crazy as they did this offseason. I thought maybe make a couple of good signings, maybe a trade, re-sign a guy or two coming off a World Series championship, but no, they went absolutely crazy this offseason. Blake Snell, Roki Sasaki was another reason why I thought they wouldn't go crazy for a starter out there like Snell or Burns, because I thought he would be the big ticket guy that they would be going after. But the Dodgers, they ended up having an incredible offseason. I just thought at the time, like I said, they wouldn't go crazy. Maybe bring in Matthew Boyd for the back end of the rotation, kind of like what they did with James Paxton not too long ago. But yeah, I was way off here, but they did bring in a left-handed starter. I'm just saying. So up next, I had Paul Goldschmidt going to the Astros. Now, I was kind of on the right track here. I just thought they would go a bit of a cheaper route. They ended up going with a much better option in Christian Walker for first base. I was just thinking, after the Jose Abreu bust not too long ago, that would they want to spend big money on another first baseman? And I also thought, too, they needed to do something for the outfield. They needed another guy or two for the pitching staff, so maybe they would spread the money around a little bit more. And they still do need something for the outfield, I'll just say that. But I thought Paul Goldschmidt would have been a good veteran guy to add to Houston, a team that still wants to compete. And I thought with him, he would benefit from the Crawford boxes in Houston, give him a little bit more juice in the bat. But in the end, he went to the Yankees. I'm glad the Astros went with Christian Walker. Up next, I had Jose Iglesias going back to the Mets. Now, Iglesias had a pretty solid year with the Mets this past year, but one thing I should have paid attention to was the batting average on balls in play. He had a very high BABIP this past year, and knowing David Stearns, this is a guy that's all about the analytics. He likes to look for value anywhere he can. Now, I think Iglesias could still maybe go back to the Mets at some point, but as of right now, Nick Madrigal seems to be the guy going into his spot, and that makes a lot more sense with David Stearns as well, a guy that looks for value. Nick Madrigal was a former top prospect not too long ago. He's run into injuries over the last couple of years, so maybe he can get his career back on track with the Mets. So yeah, the Madrigal signing, especially with Stearns, makes a lot more sense in hindsight, but Iglesias, you never know. Maybe someone goes down, they give him a phone call, and he can go back there. Obviously, he was a fan favorite last year with the whole OMG thing, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him go elsewhere as well. Moving on to Alex Verdugo, and I had him going to the A's. Now, I feel like maybe this could still happen. Seth Brown is projected to be the left fielder as of right now for the A's. I think Verdugo would be a slight upgrade. Now, with Verdugo, he did have a terrible season last year, but he was playing every day with the Yankees. He was playing in the World Series, for crying out loud. Now, there are some benefits with Verdugo. He makes a lot of contact. He does play good defense in left field, but at this point, I don't know if the A's, see him as a starter. I could see a team maybe seeing him as a backup guy, a fourth outfielder. We'll see what ends up happening with him, but I don't know if he's going to be signing anytime soon. So earlier I mentioned I thought the Dodgers would bring back a guy or two, but one guy that I didn't think was going to go back was Blake Treinen. I know he loves it out there in LA. I know he's got a home out there, but because he pitched so well last year and he was great in the postseason, I thought a team out there would throw a good amount of money at him. And I think I was on the right track here with the Rangers because they completely completely overhauled their bullpen. They brought in Chris Martin, Shawn Armstrong, Robert Garcia, Obi Milner, Jacob Webb. I mean, they completely overhauled that pen there. And I thought Trinan would have been a great fit, but in the end, he ended up going back to the Dodgers. I wonder if the Rangers made a phone call at one point, but in the end, I think I was on the right track. I also had Jose Quintana going to the Rangers, and in fact, the Rangers didn't spend anything on their rotation, minus bringing back Nathan Eovaldi, but my thinking at the time was the Rangers, they have a lot of question marks when it comes to the health of their starting pitchers. Jacob deGrom, obviously, Nathan Eovaldi, go back a few years ago, this is a guy that was having some issues. He's missed a couple of starts over the last couple of years. Tyler Mahle coming back into the rotation, John Gray. They're even talking about him being in the bullpen, perhaps, so we'll just have to wait and see on that, but there are question marks with the health, and I thought Quintana would have been a good depth option for them. Now, this could definitely still happen. I think eventually he'll latch onto a team. Moving on to Luis Severino, and I'm going to be honest here, I really liked this prediction at the time, and in hindsight, I still like the idea of it. Now, my thinking going into the offseason was the Tigers needed a number 2 behind Tarek Skubal. I thought that would have been a pretty good 1-2 punch, but in the end, the Tigers brought back an old friend in Jack Flaherty, who they moved at the trade deadline. I think that was the better move, but I was thinking with Flaherty, right? He pitched so well this past year. He pitched well in the postseason that he could probably get some good money elsewhere, but teams were irked about his medical history. They weren't really willing to give him a long-term deal, so he just took the 2-year deal with the Tigers. And then Luis Severino, he shocked us all by getting a 3-year deal with the A's, the largest contract in A's history. So, with Severino at the time, yeah, I thought it was a good idea, but I think I was in the ballpark with what the Tigers were trying to do. Heading into the offseason, I thought Jock Peterson was just going to go back to the Diamondbacks. He had a great season with them last year, so I was thinking, why fix what's not broke? But then the Diamondbacks turned around and spent a fat chunk of money on Corbin Burns, so they had to go a bit of a cheaper route for the bats. They traded for Josh Naylor instead of bringing back Christian Walker, and then they brought back Randall Grichuk. So in the end, not surprised to see them move on from Jock Peterson, especially after signing Corbin Burns. Moving on to Tomoyuki Sagano, I had him signing with the Padres, and in hindsight, I don't think this is a terrible prediction after seeing what the Padres have done this offseason. They haven't spent a whole lot of money. They signed Nick Pivetta, Kyle Hart, Connor Joe, Jason Hayward after losing Jerickson Profar and Ha-Seong Kim. So this would have been a cheap signing for them. They're on the West Coast, close to Japan. So yeah, I still think this was an okay prediction at the time. I definitely did not see the Orioles making a play for him. On to Nick Martinez, and I got this one wrong. He ended up going back to the Reds, which I think is good for them. They've really bolstered that rotation with Brady Singer. Nick Martinez has that good flexibility to where he can be a starter or a reliever. He'll be solid in either role. I was thinking for the Nationals at the time, right? Got a young pitching staff coming up, a team that could be contending here in the next year or two. So I was thinking with Martinez, if they bring him in, this is a guy that could work into the rotation, work into the bullpen, whatever it may be. He has that flexibility for an up-and-coming Nationals team. But in the end, I'm glad he went back to the Reds. I'm excited to see what they can do this year. Back to the Padres, and I thought they were going to bring back Ha-Seong Kim. He had the shoulder injury, so I was thinking they could bring him back on like a 1-year deal or whatever and go back out into the market next year. And in the end, he ended up going to the Rays, which I did consider the Rays as a possible landing spot. I mentioned that in another video somewhere. I just felt like Kim, he fits the Rays very well because they have some question marks in the infield, especially at shortstop. So I'm glad Kim ended up going to Tampa, but I really thought he was going to go back to San Diego. On to Justin Verlander, and I think I went with my heart over my head here. I was really hoping we could have seen a reunion. I was thinking with the Tigers coming into the offseason that they needed to bolster the starting pitching. They ran with the chaos pitching staff last year where they were just kind of going with whoever minus Tarek Skubal, and I was thinking, okay, maybe they could bring in Severino to be the number 2 behind Skubal, and then Verlander can work into the back of the rotation. But kind of thinking back on it, the Tigers, they already have a lot of young starting pitching that's looking for time. So in the end, probably doesn't make sense. I think I just went with my heart here over my head. On to Max Scherzer, and I was thinking the Royals would have been a good landing spot. He's originally from Missouri. The Cardinals didn't have a need for him, so I was thinking, okay, well, the Royals, they're looking to compete. Now, they ended up bringing back Michael Wacha for the rotation, so there went that. But I was thinking with Scherzer at the time, they could bring him in. He could basically replace Wacha in the rotation and help that team compete. But in the end, he ended up going to a team that's a bit more desperate in the Blue Jays, a team that's really trying to get back on track, so I definitely see the fit there. But I thought this would have been a fun one. Moving on to Jeff Hoffman, and I had him landing with the Dodgers, and I was kind of on the right track here. They ended up landing two high leverage relievers in Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates. I thought Hoffman would have been a great fit here at the back end of the bullpen with the Dodgers. You know, they've gotten a lot of good stuff out of their pitchers there. Look what they did with Michael Kopech this past year. This guy is one of the best relievers in the game for the last couple of years. I thought it would have been a seamless fit, and got himself a nice payday with the Blue Jays. I was thinking the Dodgers, they definitely would have done that, especially if they signed Tanner Scott. But in the end, I think Tanner Scott was the better option. But again, I think I was onto something here. Up next, I had Carlos Estevez going to the Diamondbacks. And again, I didn't think they were going to sign Corbin Burns. I figured they were going to spread around the money a little bit. And I knew they needed something for the back end of the bullpen. You got guys like Justin Martinez, AJ Puck, that could be the closer. But Puck, he looked a little better in the setup role last year. Justin Martinez has good stuff, good velo, but he walks a few guys and he's still very young. So I figured a veteran guy for the back end of the bullpen like Estevez could make a lot of sense, who has flexibility as both a closer and a setup guy. But in the end, he went to the Royals. I'm excited to see what he can do there. But the Diamondbacks did end up getting a veteran arm for the back end of the bullpen in Kendall Graveman. So, again, kind of in the ballpark here. I was kind of seeing them adding a veteran reliever. On to Nathan Eovaldi, and here is one of the few that I got right. It was kind of one of those situations again. Why fix what's not broke? He helped them win a World Series a couple of years ago. He seems very comfortable there. The Rangers needed to keep as much starting pitching intact as possible. They got a lot of question marks in the rotation when it comes to health. So Eovaldi just felt like the perfect fit for the Rangers for me. On to Nick Pivetta, and I had him going to the Braves. At the time, it felt like a pretty good fit. They got some question marks when it comes to the health of their rotation. Spencer Strider coming back from elbow surgery, so who knows what happens there. Chris Sale, yes, did have a Cy Young season, but he had a lot of injuries before that, so let's see how he holds up here in 2025. Reynaldo Lopez started having some arm issues towards the end of the year last year. Now, you got some younger guys that are going to be competing for some spots, so I figured Nick Pivetta, a guy that's been pretty steady over the last few years, would have been a nice addition. But in hindsight, kind of thinking about how Alex Anthopoulos likes to operate, he probably needs to keep as many draft picks as possible right now. The Braves need to start adding a bit more to that farm, and they would have had to give up a draft pick here to sign Pivetta. In the end, he went to the Padres, but I don't like this prediction looking back on it. On to Michael Wacha. I had him going to the Angels, and again, I think I was in the right ballpark here. I knew the Angels needed to add something for the rotation, but I knew they weren't going to be able to land a guy like Corbin Burns or Max Fried, because those guys probably don't want to go to the Angels at this point with all the failures they've been having. But I figured if they threw some money at a mid-rotation kind of a guy, that could tempt them to go there. And Michael Wacha, I think, fits that bill. In the end, ended up staying with the Royals, and they got Yusei Kikuchi instead. Kind of fits that same tier as Michael Wacha. I like the Kikuchi signing better than Wacha, but in the end, again, I think I was in the right ballpark. On to Walker Buehler, who ended up coming to my Red Sox, and I thought that was a good fit coming into the offseason, but I figured the Mets would throw some money at him, and that could tempt him to go there, and kind of fits with what David Stearns was trying to do this offseason. He was looking for value. He brought in Frankie Montas, who unfortunately is going to be missing a bit of time, but then he also went after Clay Holmes, who was a reliever, and they're going to be using him as a starter moving forward. So David Stearns, he's always looking for value out there, and I think that, Walker Buehler fits that bill. Bring him in on a one-year deal, throw $22 million at him, and then, get his career back on track. And the Mets, they did a great job with the pitching side of things last year. So I thought that would have been a good home for him. But in the end, the Red Sox are a good home too. On to Shane Bieber, and this one was easy. I didn't see him leaving the Guardians, but I did think coming into the offseason that there would be some serious interest in him, and if a team could throw enough money at him, maybe that could tempt him to go there, which the Red Sox were very interested in Shane Bieber, but in the end, like I thought he would, he stayed with the Guardians, right? He got Tommy John surgery. He's been doing his rehab with them. Why leave at this point when he's not going to be back until halfway through the season? So you might as well finish your rehab with Cleveland, go back out to the market next year. On to Gleyber Torres. I had him going to the Mariners, and looking back on it, I don't think it was a terrible prediction by any means. The Mariners didn't do anything to address second base. All they did was bring in Donovan Solano and re-sign Jorge Polanco. I think Gleyber definitely would have been a nice addition for them. A guy that gets on base at a decent rate, that would have been a good fit for the Mariners, who had a tough time with that last offseason. Ended up going to the Tigers. Comerica, that's a bit of a tough ballpark for right-handed hitters, so let's see how he does there. But definitely better than what what it would have been in Seattle. That's a tough ballpark for any hitters. So, Glaber, in the end, I thought it would have been good with the Mariners, but for the Tigers, that's fine too. On to Kirby Yates. I had him going to the Phillies, and at the time, I really liked this prediction, but in the end, they went the cheaper route. They brought in Jordan Romano, who has been a very good closer in the past. We had a lot of injuries last year, so I think with the Phillies, what they're doing now is, they're bringing in Jordan Romano, who could be a decent option for them, but I think they're looking at guys like Orion Kerkering, who could maybe step into that role. That guy is absolutely nasty. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be the closer this coming year, but, Jordan Romano, I think he's the better option as a fallback option, whereas Kirby Yates, he would have been the closer. So again, I think the Phillies, they're more so looking internally at that spot. Back to Yusei Kikuchi, and I really thought he was going to stay with the Astros. It was kind of one of those things again, why fix what's not broke? He was very good for the Astros in the second half last year, so I figured they would just bring him back, but in the end, he took a good amount of money from the Angels, and looking back on it too, the Astros, they already have a pretty good amount of pitching there already. You got a couple of guys coming back from injury this year, Luis Garcia, maybe Lance McCullers Jr. Let's see if he can finally make his way back. But, Yusei Kikuchi, in the end, the Angels needed him more, and they definitely gave him a good chunk of change. On to Tanner Scott. I had him going to the Blue Jays. I knew they needed a high leverage reliever at the back end of the bullpen. They had the worst bullpen in all of Major League Baseball in 2024. I thought Tanner Scott would have been perfect for them. Instead, he went to the Dodgers. But again, kind of in the right ballpark here. I was on the right track. They ended up getting Jeff Hoffman, who is another high leverage reliever that was on the market this past year. So Tanner Scott would have been great there. He went to the Dodgers. I like the Jeff Hoffman move too. Moving on to Christian Walker. I had him going to the Pirates, and looking back, I do not like this prediction. I think this was more wishful thinking on my end. I knew the Pirates needed to add a bat. Christian Walker is a guy who's a Pennsylvania native. I thought it would have been a really nice fit there, but silly me thinking the Pirates are actually going to spend money. But I figured at the time, maybe they could spend money on a 3-year deal, not getting themselves into a long-term commitment. I thought Christian Walker maybe could have fit that bill, but again, silly me. Bob Nutting will never spend money. Back to the Blue Jays. I also had them getting Tyler O'Neill, and I got it wrong. But again, I think I was on the right track here. I knew the Blue Jays needed to add something for the middle of the lineup to go along with Vlad Jr. They needed some more power there. Tyler O'Neill hit over 30 home runs last year in the AL East. He's a native of Canada. I thought it would have been a great fit, and instead, they went with Anthony Santander, a guy who hit over 40 home runs. So they went with a better power option out there. I thought this would have been a nice addition, but again, I think I was once again in the ballpark. On to Sean Manaea. I had him going to the Guardians, and looking back on this, I don't like this pick. I knew the Guardians needed to add something for the rotation, but once again, silly me, thinking a team like the Guardians would actually go out there and spend a good amount of money. Now, they did add some starting pitching with Luis Ortiz, and they brought back Shane Bieber, who will be back in the second half, but I figured Sean Manaea would be great for their rotation, a guy that gives you a good amount of innings, some stability there, and they did not have good starting pitching last year. So I think looking back on it, the fit, the player team fit was good, but when it comes to actually spending the money, I should have known better. Coming into the offseason, I really thought Jerickson Profar was going to stay with the Padres, coming off a career year, good guy in the clubhouse there. I figured they would find a way to keep him around, but again, we found out ownership was having their issues, and looking back on the last couple of years, there's been some question marks when it comes to the payroll. So looking back in hindsight, it makes sense that they didn't want to go out there and spend the money on Profar, especially coming off a career year where, who knows if he's going to be able to replicate that moving forward. The track record with him, was nowhere close to what he did this past year. So in the end, not surprised the Padres didn't pony up the money to keep him around, and instead they looked for some cheaper alternatives, especially with the issues they've been having with the payroll. On to Teoscar Hernandez. I had him going to the Red Sox, and I was feeling pretty good about this pick coming into the offseason. They negotiated with him last offseason before he went to the Dodgers, and I knew they needed a right-handed bat. To me, he would have been a great fit, but again, looking back in hindsight, it kind of makes sense that they didn't go after Teoscar and they brought someone in like Alex Bregman instead, because their outfield is pretty crowded as of right now. Now, also going into the offseason, I figured maybe Wilyer Abreu could be moved in a trade, which could open up right right field for them. So that was my thinking of Teoscar going into right field. He could also, be the DH at times as well. I think he was a great fit. But as the offseason went on, I kind of got the sense that the Red Sox weren't going to be moving Willie Abreu. And look where we are now. He's still with the team. And again, they ended up getting Alex Bregman, which I love that they did. But if they ended up bringing Teoscar, I would have been quite happy. Here was another wishful thinking prediction. I had Anthony Santander going to the Reds. Now, I knew the Reds needed to add some bats. Now, they didn't add the bat of Santander with all that power. Instead, they went with a cheaper route. They traded for Gavin Lux, bringing a guy like Austin Hayes. So, no, that's not going to be the same power production as Santander. But looking back on it, I think the Reds, they're going to be more focused on, getting their guys healthy. Someone like Matt McClain coming back, I think they're expecting big things out of him. So, knowing the Reds, again, this is more wishful thinking, and I should have known better that they weren't going to go out there and drop cash. Up next, I had Blake Snell going to the Orioles, and looking back on it, I don't think it was a bad prediction at all. This is a team full of young talent, had a lot of payroll flexibility, and a team that was losing Corbin Burns. So I figured, would they go that extra mile to sign Corbin Burns to the dollars in the years they ended up getting? I didn't really see that, but I saw Blake Snell as a pretty good fallback option, a guy that would, require less years, less money overall. I thought he fit the Orioles perfectly. It would have given them an ace for the next several years, but instead they went the cheaper route, not really doing all that much when it came to the pitching side of things. You brought in Charlie Morton, veteran guy for the middle of the rotation on a 1-year deal. They got Tomoyuki Sagano. So I think looking back on it, it kind of gives me the sense they're expecting big things out of Grayson Rodriguez. Let's see what he ends up doing. But, still looking back on this offseason, I'm surprised the Orioles didn't go out there and get a more high profile free agent. On to Jack Flaherty, I had him going to the Cubs, and I really liked the fit of this one. Now, the Cubs, it felt like they were everywhere in free agency this offseason. They were trying hard after Alex Bregman before he ended up going to the Red Sox. They were connected with a lot of guys out there, but in the end, for the rotation, they made the move of signing Matthew Boyd, who's going to be more of a back end of the rotation kind of a guy. But I figured Flaherty would have been nice for them. A guy that they could probably get on like a 3 or a 4-year deal. Would cost some money, but he wouldn't break the bank like Corbin Burns. I think he would have been a great fit alongside Imanaga and Justin Steele. In the end, he went back to the Tigers. I really liked that as well. I also was looking at the pitching department side of things too. The Tigers, they've made a lot of strides over the last several years when it comes to their pitching development. And the Cubs, they got a great thing going on over there too with their pitching lab. But in the end, he just went back to the Tigers, which I think is good too. On to Pete Alonso. I had him signing with the Nationals. And again, I think I was kind of on the right track here. I knew the Nationals needed to do something at first base. Instead, they went a cheaper route. They made a trade for Nathaniel Lowe. I think that was a pretty solid move overall. But I think there was also some wishful thinking here as well, thinking the Nationals would go out there and spend the big bucks in free agency. My thinking at the time was, hey, they're getting pretty close to a competitive window. They got a good amount of young talent coming up. So I figured go after Pete Alonso, and that could be good timing with all this young talent coming up. But I think the Nationals, they're not quite there yet. I think they actually want to get closer to competing for a playoff spot. So maybe next offseason, they'll end up making a splash. All right, I got one right here. Willie Adames going to the Giants. Now, I loved this idea coming into the offseason. I knew the Giants needed to add a bit of a bopper to the middle of the order to go along with Matt Chapman. Willie Adames had over 30 home runs last year. And I was also thinking, too, they had Tyler Fitzgerald at shortstop, but that's a guy with some versatility. He could move to some other positions. So I figured Willie Adames would be a perfect addition at shortstop for the long term. I felt like they also, they needed another player there, another marketable kind of a player, right? You got guys like Matt Chapman, Young-Hoo Lee, Logan Webb there as well. But Willie Adames, it just felt like a great fit to me overall. Moving on to Alex Bregman. I had him going to the Tigers. I guess this one's a little embarrassing because he ended up coming to my Red Sox. Now, I knew Bregman coming into the offseason would be a good right-handed bat for the Red Sox, a guy that could play either second, third base, whatever it may be. I just didn't think the Red Sox were going to spend the money to get it done. I was in a position where I needed to see it to believe it because the Red Sox hadn't really been spending the money over the last few years. And I thought the Tigers, a team that just made it to the postseason this past year, a ton of young talent, talent, they would have been a great fit for Bregman. And they tried very hard after him. They made a big offer, 6 years, I think around $180 million overall. So they definitely made a good effort for him. I really thought he was going to go to the Tigers going into the offseason. His market really dragged out, right? You got the Red Sox, the Tigers, the Cubs got involved at one point. So in the end, I think it was a good prediction, but I'm very happy this one didn't come true. Back to my Red Sox, and I really thought they were going to land Max Fried. I knew they needed to add something for the top of the rotation, and I also knew they needed to add a lefty to the rotation. They had all righties in there, so I thought Fried would have been a perfect fit, and the Red Sox thought the same thing too. They made a big offer for Fried, I think around 7 years, $190 million, but in the end, the Yankees, they blew everyone away, and they landed their guy. And, going into the offseason, I still remember everyone saying, oh, he's going to go out west. He'll go to the Dodgers or whatever. But I was one of the few people that didn't think he was going to. Now, I was surprised about Blake Snell going to the Dodgers. My goodness, the Dodgers just had a ridiculous offseason. So, but with the Dodgers, I didn't think they were going to commit to, say, like a 6 or 7 year deal with all the pitching that they had. And again, that's why I was surprised about Snell going there. So I figured Fried, he wasn't going to go out there, and I'm not surprised I ended up with the Yankees. Up next, I had Corbin Burnes going to the Mets. Now, I think there was also a little bit of wishful thinking here. I was thinking the Mets, they really needed to upgrade the top of the rotation, and Corbin Burnes has a relationship with David Stearns from back in their days with the Brewers. But looking back on it, it makes sense that the Mets didn't pursue Burnes. David Stearns, like I said earlier, he likes to look for value out there on the pitching side of things, which is what he ended up doing with Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. So it's not surprising that Stearns didn't give out a big contract for Corbin Burnes. And also, in the end, Burnes, he just really wanted to be closer to home in Arizona, so no surprise there. But for the Mets, I still think it would have made sense for them to go after a top of the rotation guy, but it is what it is. And last but not least, I had Juan Soto staying with the Yankees. And coming into the offseason, I felt pretty good about this one. I'm thinking, how did the Yankees let this guy go? You got the modern-day Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris with Judge and Soto, an incredible 1-2 punch. They just made it to a World Series, so I figured the Yankees would do what it took to keep this guy around. But a part of me, I think, underestimated the Mets and Steve Cohen a little bit. Steve Cohen, he's probably had this guy's name circled for years. He was not going to stop until he got his guy. I was thinking the Yankees, they would do what it took in the end, but the Mets, they were not going to be beat this time around. They're tired of being treated like the little brother in New York. And a part of me, looking back on this, listening to Juan Soto speak at the press conference, hearing different quotes out there, kind of not surprised he ended up going to the Mets. I also think, he gets to be his own guy there instead of being around Aaron Judge, right? Yeah, you got Lindor with the Mets, but Soto, he's going to be an absolute superstar with the Mets moving forward. I'm glad the Mets got their guy. But in the end, everyone, those were my predictions. I'd say terrible picks overall, but I think for a lot of them, not trying to give a cop-out answer, but I think I was in the ballpark on a lot of them. I think my thinking was in the right place. I just didn't execute in the end. But those are predictions for you. Every year, my predictions are wrong. But let me know what you think. Do you think some of these picks were kind of good in the end? Do you think they were pretty terrible? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. But everyone, that's all I got for right now. If you're kind of the way out, hit that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new. We're trying to get to 50K by opening day. We're about 2K away. Come on, everybody. We're so close. But everyone, go have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.